Hi, I'm Ruth from pebble-collections.com. Do you suspect your spouse is struggling with mental health issues? How can you tell, and what's happening behind the symptoms you see? Throughout this Pebble, my primary focus is speaking to a potential female supporter. By equipping you with knowledge and understanding, I hope to lessen the chances of another tear-washed face or stained pillow tonight. I know those very well, having had hundreds of them over the years, and that's not a figure of speech. Most of us have heard of the black dog metaphor for depression. However, mental illness disorders of anxiety and depression can commonly coexist, and I like to call the anxiety-depression combination the grey-black dog. Whether it's anxiety as prominent, leading to depressive or withdrawal episodes, or depression as primary with bouts of or together with anxiety. So how can you tell if there's something serious brewing deep beneath the surface with your spouse? Everybody at some point during everyday life will feel anxious or feel down over something. However, ongoing occurrences can be the signal towards underlying mental health issues or disorders. It's the body's natural way of communicating that there's something that requires attention. Like a mucus-filled cough is a common sign of fluid in the lungs, for example. Usually it's difficult to pinpoint the beginnings of anxiety and depression, unless, for example, it's PTSD or depression that has developed over a known event or genetic condition handed down. Anxiety or depression is normally something that doesn't suddenly hit you like a chest cold. These conditions grow gradually in the background, where symptoms like the milder ones can go unnoticed or is put down as something else. It's like when you're unknowingly walking down a slight decline on a road and you look back to see that there's a slight crest of a hill. You can see roughly where it begins, but the curvature of the road is so gradual that the beginning of the decline becomes vague. It becomes tricky if he's unknowingly been affected or have been experiencing symptoms for most of his life, as the outward signs to him will be just his own normal characteristics and personality, and therefore normal for you too. I believe this situation is a big contributor to sufferers remaining undiagnosed and untreated. There isn't enough time to go through the common physical symptoms with you now. However, there are organisations available who are equipped to provide helpful resources for your research. The turning point that makes you look back to find your spouse is on a downward slope. Could be that the symptoms have grown severe enough for you to start thinking, something's going on here, this is not right. If you've noticed some uncharacteristic, usually negatively charged changes in your spouse, start by looking into the past of your relationship. Personally, I've found an effective way to begin exploring the beginnings of those changes is to look back through your family photo albums or folders. Begin from the most recent snaps and then work backwards. Each photo will trigger your emotions of that time and therefore your memory of his emotions or mood as well. The following are some of the signs that could indicate potential issues. One of the easier telltale signs of anxiety depression is that he's lost his happy self. This is not necessarily just an indication of depression. Maybe his demeanour appears weighed down, like something heavy resting on his shoulders. Start by making a list on paper, all the attributes of him in the past that told you he was happy and all was well with the world. More than just a smile you love, but note the way his eyes looked. List his usual happy mannerisms, a tune he would hum, sing or whistle, or a task he would do when he was chipper. Then with your collated list, assess the ratio between his old happy self and how often you see those attributes in him now. If the percentage of heaviness is greater, this could be an initial piece in a broader puzzle. The slide into withdrawal, like with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder adult type, Being under it with depression, anxiety, or system overload is very commonly marked by self-centeredness, because during this time sufferers are very inward looking. There could also be a quick onset of apparent laziness, a heavy weight hindering his mood, or tiredness unusual times of the day. Sometimes a 1 to 2 hour sleep is enough to reboot the system, and then he's happy again. If not, symptoms familiar to you will proceed to unfold relatively quickly. See the legend list in the PTSD triggers clip for some ideas. Another common indicator is a loss of interest in his usual pastimes. Has he stopped going to the places he would usually like to? Even to those places he once tolerated but still went knowing it was important. The excuses that he gives for not going are not necessarily logical either, but can be quite justifiable. Perhaps he's leaving jobs he would normally finish left not done, or doesn't like going out at night to dinner. He may no longer enjoy spending time with his friends, or doesn't like people visiting your home anymore. During high anxiety depression, sufferers find it extremely hard to socialise, so he would prefer to be on his own and employ methods to escape, like self-medication. By this, I'm not necessarily referring to the obvious ones of alcohol, which could be just a small, seemingly innocent glass after work every day, cigarettes or drugs. But self-medication or escapism can also mean excessive television, movie watching, or playing computer games at every spare chance. Those escapisms are employed on a consistent basis during the times when he is not working, eating, or sleeping. They will take over usual family time or be relied upon during weekends, and where once he'd be out and about doing mad stuff. Watch out for changes in sleeping patterns as well. Examples would be sleeping in regularly or taking 1 to 2 hour naps during unusual times of the day or weekend. Take notice of his sleep cycles at night, his breathing intervals or its pace, any lengthy pauses, and how quickly or how long it takes to go to sleep each night. Falling asleep on a regular basis in less than 30 seconds after his head hits the pillow is a strong indication that his mind is exhausted. Or breathing heavily like he's running in his sleep may indicate his body is still on overdrive. High anxiety and depression is also linked to a sudden change in appetite. Indicators are also found in the sufferer's comments. And how do you tell the difference between anxiety founder statements and depression based? Please note that these differences I explain and examples I provide are very generalised and may not relate exactly to your situation. Depression statements tend to be the easier ones to spot. They are usually tainted with despair, despondency, or sadness, as if the world as we know it is about to end. An example could be like, "Yes, let's buy that. Tomorrow there'll be no food on the table. Next month we'll lose the house, and then we'll all be dead." This, of course, is highly embellished and totally unrealistic, but to a depressed mind it's real and could all happen that way. People with anxiety disorders often tend to expect negative outcomes, are overly pessimistic, generally known as a worrier, or feel a loss of control over upcoming feared situations or events. Their worry, comments, or excuses are normally out of proportion or unrealistic to what would usually be expected. And they don't always see their worries or comments as excessive or unproportionate either. A less obvious possible indicator relevant to sufferers of PTSD is one that stems from an adolescent trauma. A sufferer can get emotionally stuck developmentally. This is regarding such things like their current coping mechanisms, reactions, and attachment style. They're like that of a child at the same age group and gender of the time when the trauma occurred. You may be finding yourself respectfully likening the way they handle a high anxiety-inducing situation in a childlike manner. Of course, this indicator needs to be surrounded by other anxiety-based observations. One last indicator is their facial expression that can occur during a depressive episode, high anxiety, or withdrawal. These states can change the appearance of the face. Since I'm an artist, I've painted my own impression of this common occurrence observed among sufferers. It's like the muscles on both sides of the face have sagged, as if the outside of the face has been weighed down. Their eyes are dull and droopy at the outer corners. So it's not just the mannerisms, attitudes, or what is done or said that indicates they're under it. It's also the look on his or her face. If all of these indicators are underpinned with undiagnosed high-functioning autism adult type, that adds a whole new dimension of complications beyond what I have time for now. These ideas of underlying mental health disorders I've offered here does not replace seeing a qualified physician or diagnostic assessment, advice and treatment. Encourage him to see your doctor as close as you can to noticing the symptoms. Perhaps frame your support of him in a way that you are both facing whatever it is together as a unit. This is so you can go along to the appointment together. Add that it would be good for you to go, because then you can ask if you were contributing at all to the hidden condition. You will also be able to offer some observations, remember he's not sick, you've noticed into the mix. If you suspect he has grown up with the condition, he is likely to see these observations you mention as just normal behaviour, and will logically in his mind not see the need to include them in the discussion if he went alone. If you want to have what you say heard and remembered, the best time to try is when he's happy or stable. Use I language like I feel, or I interpret this action as, and not you statements like you did this when, and so on. As a supporter of a spouse with mental health struggles or disorders, you need to consciously separate yourself from him, and I don't mean stop loving or supporting. Regarding mental health, you cannot support him effectively side by side with him. This will initially sound strange, but the best analogy for this concept is a roller coaster carriage, its tracks, and a boarding station. During an episode, he is in the carriage, heading up and down along the track at varying angles, and then returning to a normal plateau, normal perhaps only for him, back at the station. You need to be an observer to the ride he is on, not in the carriage as a participant, and not standing on the tracks. For example, harking back to part 1 where I explained the protective bubble effect or the flip lid and potential negative actions occurring during that time that he can't remember, may I suggest you avoid saying the A word, as this could be like waving a red flag in front of a bull, as this action is the equivalent to placing yourself in harm's way in the middle of the track. Using variations of the word hurt is better. What's hurting you? How and why? Remain at the boarding station as a spectator, standing well behind the yellow line. This is so your ankle doesn't get caught at the back of the carriage and you end up being dragged along on a ride that isn't yours to have. You'll be emotionally drawn up and down along with him during his episode, bashing your head against the sleepers like that proverbial brick wall and getting yourself nowhere except back at the station with a crap load of painful emotional bruises. Your emotional strength will be drained, and therefore your ability to support him will be dramatically reduced. Supporting him is not a side-by-side thing, but as a spectator waiting back at the station, strong and ready for his return. Regarding anxiety, I should remind you at this point the difference between trigger and cause. A trigger is a small occurrence or action which starts something that is already primed, ready to happen, while a cause is the reason for that something to happen. So how do you not get emotionally involved and stand back and watch? By understanding the carriage he is in and what is happening behind his actions and behaviour, and I hope this pebble is helping with that. This will empower you to recognize what behavior is disorder-based and not caused by an external factor like you. As in part 1, where I described you being perceived as the cause of a hurt instead of just the trigger tripping a pre-existing hurt. Can you see the difference? By understanding the carriage he is in, you are effectively allowing the separation process to being the spectator to take place automatically. If you're still confused on where he or she plateaus their ups or downward slopes and are still trying to work out his or her cycles, the mood diary exercise will help. This process can also apply to depression. Most likely you are being told to not tell anyone or talk to people about what you're dealing with. Silence with no one as a sounding board is unhealthy, not only for you, but this form of oppression diminishes your ability to help and to stand by your husband. My primary supporter for nearly 9 years, who mostly carried my limp, emotionally exhausted self with my arm over his shoulders, was Jesus. God supplied me with answers, love, comfort, and encouragement. The supporter next in line was my psychologist. She was vital in my journey. She helped me with my stress, my anxiety, confusion, and frustration. She also helped me understand myself regarding my own disabilities, limitations, traits, and especially what shortcomings I was bringing into a relationship. That could possibly sound scary for you, to be so vulnerable, but think of it this way. Through a psychologist, you will get understanding and learn how you are triggering your spouse and what to do and what not to do for your specific situation. The flow-on effect is you and your marriage will benefit. Plus, your psychologist will explain to you what is happening with your husband, allowing you to stay behind that yellow line. Then, as I did, surround yourself with a small support group consisting of either family members and or friends who are there to provide you with the support you need in between your psychological visits. To the lady supporter, when and how is the best way to approach him with your hurting heart? Your first step is to discuss this with your psychologist, as he or she will advise you accordingly. When sharing your heart, remember to not climb into the carriage with him. To help prevent this, may I suggest you acknowledge your spouse's pain first, as this will reduce the risk of a defensive wall flying up between you. They need to see the heart within you in other avenues like body language and tone of voice. To the male supporter, you can't fix this in your spouse. She can't just get over it, and you cannot carry her through it. There is one suggestion, however, is to go to the psychologist with her to find out how best to help her in your situation. If it means swallowing your pride or your ego, then so be it. This sacrificial act by you will let her know you are on her side, that you're working on this together as a team, and most importantly, that she's not on her own. Thank you for passing on this pebble to provide the chance for hope to touch a bleeding marriage. Until next time, onwards and upwards.